Welcome back. So far in our series, we've acquired data. We've pulled that data into Excel. We use Power Query to clean that data and make it usable in a table format. We also added to those tables some naming conventions, and now we've built a couple of pivot tables off of them. So at this point, I want to show you a couple of little tools you can use to help clean up your data or clean up your pivot tables. And then I want to finish building out the pivot tables that the unit sent me so that way they have a option to pull this in and see how to do that. So how can we clean up some of this pivot table data? Well, for one, we can kind of look at all of these columns, and if you name this com or commitments, you will have a issue. It'll say you can't name it that because there's already a column of that. So we're going to go COM. If I was to do this, I believe it should. Oh, it didn't because I used a bracket there. See, pivot table field name already exists. It won't let you name something that's already in your pivot tables, but you can name it abbreviated versions or give it more spaces or things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to name this commitments. And see, it allowed me to name that. I'm going to name this one T authority. And this one, because these have brackets around them, you could just name them UOO or AEP. And in this case, I'm just going to name this GR_OBL for gross obligations. Now that gives us a much neater look to it. I can then change my size values so that way I can get it a little bit neater and available to me. And again, we can kind of look at that. The FYs are probably good. We can rename this to object class. Again, allows you to rename those, but it doesn't rename it in your fields. So you still need to know, or I guess it does. Some of those, depending on the pivot table, it looks like, because it didn't name it here, but it did name it on this one. So you just kind of have to watch Excel and see how things are shaping up. But on the pivot tables that I've got, I have one from the unit, and they have a RMP breakout. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to this one. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to create a copy from here, and I'm going to rename this EBAS_RMPs. Now, RMPs are 728. So again, this is not in the classic view. So I'm just going to put this up here and click up here for RMP. And that will give me my breakout by unit of where all my RMPs are being spent. Again, another way you could look at this is if you copy it down, and then you ultimately are creating a second pivot table down here. Maybe I don't want it by dollar amounts. Maybe I want it by number of days. So for example, we could just do total days. And again, it's summing them, but it's in dollar amounts. And we don't want dollar amounts. We want numbers. So I'm going to change that to number. Oops, I'm going to change this whole thing to number. And I'm going to get rid of the decimal places. And then I'm just going to kind of scroll through and see if there's any other information. You could put like average cost per day in there, and that would give you what those average costs are, and then turn around and turn this into currency again. But that's not valuable to me at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and take those out and just go back to our targets and mirror what this unit has. But what I could do is kind of come here and go, okay, gross commitments, unpaid obligations, and AEP. That's what they have in there. Again, I'm going to switch all this back to currency. And maybe here, instead of RMPs, we want R727 ADOS. So there we can see that breakout of paid, obligated, and available balances. So we've got that one, and then they have more. They've got one for their ST2. Now their RCCCs are going to be different than mine, and in their status fund spreadsheet that they sent me, they have their ST2 on top with their O&M on the bottom. So we already built one that looks like that here. So that's where I'm going to copy and paste this one. And we're going to put it after that RMP one, but before the unit data. So I'm going to rename this from unit to ST2 PBAS themes ST2. So in this case, we've got the RCCC already there for ST2. And again, this is going to be off because I'm using two different units data, and I can use ST2 here. So that gives us what our ST2 is. This is FY23, which we want in FY24, and doesn't have anything there. And again, this is O&M. Could be a reason why. We're just going to free up the rest of these. So that's what it looks like for my unit versus their unit. The decent dollars versus the RMPs, but I'm going to leave this in there because this is how they have their information in there. So then they have an O&M by unit. So I'm going to change this one. Rename themes unit funds. All right, so here I'm going to go to the O&M. Oops. If I click on the right one, O&M. And SAGs aren't very useful to us. So I'm just going to stick those up here. But what we do want is our unit data. So we're going to do RCCC. And then I'm also going to stick in that RCCC grouping in front of it. Excuse me. And what that does is, one, I can filter out CivPay because I'd already identified some of those RCCs as being CivPay, even though we didn't do that. And again, we'll go back and take a quick look at that. That's where I had identified these two as CivPay. So now when I come back in here, I've already taken out our CivPay if they're done up by RCCCs. So that's one advantage to doing categorizing different things by RCCCs. You can group them together quite a bit easier. But maybe that's not as useful. So maybe I'll unfilter that and stick the grouping out somewhere else. So that gives me now a breakout by unit, all of our funding and where it's at by the current fiscal year, right? Nope, this is a breakout of the fiscal year. So I'm going to FY24. I'm going to stick this up in the filter, and then I'm going to bring out our commitments, our total authority that I built earlier. And then I kind of like filtering out some of the CivPay stuff because units don't always need to know what their CivPay balances are. So that kind of gives a better breakout. So from here, I've got my total authority, my commitments, my gross obligations, and then annual authority uncommitted and annual authority unobligated. So again, I'm going to clean this up by just typing T authority, gross OBL, uncom balance, and unobligated balance. So again, that's where it can have this information available. Again, we've already created a PBAS and Deems pivot table. So I believe that's all the information that's in that one. And we've shown you how to clean up some of these headers so that way it's a little bit easier to read. And again, use your naming conventions so that way you can copy and paste this stuff pretty easy to different briefings that you do. Some good information in here. Again, if you copy and paste it once, it's usually pretty easy to put out. But I want to throw in a couple more tricks just so that way we can get some benefit in here. So one of the things that I want to show you is slicers. So one of the things you can do is you can right click or click anywhere in your table, and you can go to Insert and click on Slicer. Now it's going to ask you what slicer do you want, and it's lists all the columns in your raw data. So in this case, I want the RCCC name. And what that does is it gives you a list of RCCCs. And the benefit to this is it gives you the ability to just click on one item and it'll update to it, or you can click the red X and then click all of it. If you click on one and click Control, you can start seeing multiples. Once you release Control, it'll throw those in there. So that gives you an ability to kind of narrow down some of the information. So where this might be handy is, in this case, you're looking at all of your O&M that is not CivPay, correct? No. Yes, because this is RPA. Sorry, this is RPA data. So maybe you've got this in here, and maybe you want to do a slicer to pull out some of your BMT. Say BMT in your schools, because we don't necessarily give that to our unit. So I'm going to hold Control and click the button for BMT in schools, and that's going to take that out of what we're seeing. So when I let go, it filtered those items out. So that's one way you can use slicers. And again, you can adjust this by up here on the slicers. So maybe you want 2 columns of slicers or 3. And make it a little bit smaller. I'll show you another example using my status of funds. I have slicers being utilized here for my ESP code. Sorry, this is a bad example because I was playing with things earlier, so I can delete all that. But I can look at the ESP codes that I'm using and I can put slicers in, so I can just do a slide of just the ESP codes that I want. Throw that one in there. That one's for our PIT training, and it's not named. So that's where I need to go back in my tables and name that one. But I can take it out too and just see what our ESP codes are. And these are for our summits. And again, I can go back in previous fiscal years where we use those same items, same ESP codes, and kind of see where things landed. And it just gives me a nice, clean way, quick way to click on this and see what's kind of going on. We see if there's any other slicers. Yeah, so another thing I do is, so this is my O&M. This is kind of my unit funds for their discretionary. And so that's their travel and supplies. And maybe I want to see what they did last year. I can quickly, using these slicers, just go through what they did each year and see how money was loaded. I can see where they actually spent. And so it just gives you ability to do some quick analysis and have a button to click versus having to go through all the pivot table stuff. So that's how you would use pivot tables. Get that out of the way. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this, and then I'm going to click on this, and I'm just going to hit delete and get rid of them now because they weren't on the units pivot table, but it's there and available. So that's it. That's ultimately the pivot tables. You are only limited in pivot tables by your own creativity. There are multiple things you can do. I'll pull up, we'll go with our travel UOOs, see if it pulls it up on this side, but you can build charts off these. You can build all sorts of information. Again, with the calculated columns, you can do your own percentages. You can have Excel do all of the work for you. So that way, once it's built, all you have to do is come in, refresh your raw data, and refresh this report, and it will reproduce all of that. So this is one way that we use a pivot table, is by counting the number of open travel vouchers over 30 days. So right now I've got 44, and by putting in a pivot table, I can identify on a chart which one of my units and how many items they have. I can also separate out by RTS and DTS, which makes for a really quick analysis, so I can tell them where their stuff is. So again, it's just one way to quickly look at that information. I'm going to minimize this. So yeah, so there's some options for you to build. Again, you're limited by your own creativity. You can have Excel do a lot of the work. The last thing I want to show you is, because if you look, my data here is as of yesterday morning. Today's the 3rd. My data is as of yesterday. So I actually have already pulled the data. So I've opened up my AFAOC raw data, it refreshed, and I saved it out there, but my report here hasn't updated, and I can see that here. So all I have to do to update that every day is just come in here, double click refresh. It'll go out to my raw data and pull it in. At least it should. All right, so again, this is kind of the status funds that they had previously built. It's got all their data in it, and hopefully this is what they were looking for. If not, I will work with them on getting and building a more sophisticated status funds, but that is it. That's how you build pivot tables. That's how you utilize different options. Again, I would encourage you to play around with pivot tables, see what kind of analysis you can draw. It gives you great insight on units and how they spend money, where they're spending their money, but it also gives you great insight in a unit's FM program and see how they load money, where they load money, what's driving a lot of it. It doesn't tell you the story as to why it's that way. It just simply tells you what it is. So with that said, I will conclude the series. Thank you for watching. Feel free to share your pivot tables or send messages telling us what you did. And again, this is should all be linked in the Teams group for at least the NAF that I'm a part of. And hopefully we can get more people involved and start sharing our pivot tables and improving upon our pivot tables and providing quicker analysis to our units and cut down on the time spent doing analysis versus having it readily available. So with that said, thank you for listening and participating, and hopefully you'll tune into other videos on FM and how we conduct our business. Thanks.